Building a better Bay Area. Moving forward, finding solutions. This is ABC 7 News.
Hi there, I'm Kristen Z. You're watching Getting Answers live on ABC 7, Hulu Live, and wherever you stream. We're asking experts your questions every day at 3 to get answers for you in real time. Today, a new report from our partner, the San Francisco Standard, that details the huge sum of money former San Francisco Mayor Willie Brown is allegedly making in the ongoing effort to redevelop Hunters Point. Also, will Barry Bonds finally make it into the Baseball Hall of Fame? The answer coming in minutes after an agonizing 10 years of waiting. ABC 7 Sports Director Larry Beil will be joining us later in the show. But first, big changes coming to the SATs. That's the standardized test that high school students have been taking for decades as part of the college application process. The College Board, which administers the test, announced today that the test will be all digital come 2024. This comes at a challenging time for the SATs, with more colleges dropping it, students unable to take the test, and questions about equity and fairness. So joining us now to discuss the SAT changes is Bruce Reed, Executive Director and co-founder of the Compass Education Group. That's a leading test prep company in the Bay Area. Bruce, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, starting in 2024, no more paper and number 2 pencils. Explain to us how the digital SATs will work exactly.
Yeah, this has been a long time coming, but it really appears to be a clean break that the College Board plans to make, as you said, in about 18 months. So this will affect the current 9th graders for the first time in their 11th grade fall, I suppose, when they take the PSAT, and then the full SAT will see this shift occur in the spring of 24. But it's really, I think, characterized as a kind of an update or a modernization, a renovation, if you will, of a 20th century test that can take advantage of technology to kind of address some of the more common pain points that we're hearing from students and from administrators.
Like what? What are those pain points that they seek to correct with this?
Well, most students, when asked about the SAT, they'll say it's too long. So this test will be cut down to about 2 hours from the current 3-hour duration. Administrators also complain about just disrupting the school day and just the logistics around managing a large-scale paper and pencil test. This will give schools more flexibility in terms of when they schedule the SAT and how they administer it.
Okay, but just to be clear, though, just because it's digital does not mean students can take it at home on their own computer at home, right?
That's correct. Yeah, it'll still be a very structured, proctored, supervised event. But a given high school might be given, let's say, a month window, and they can administer that test to their students anytime during that month, rather than being relegated to the 6 or 7 national test dates that occur currently. But yes, there will be oversight and structure. Students will be using or be given the option to use their own tablets or devices that schools provide, but the testing experience itself will be done in a supervised format.
Got it. All right. How do they make the test shorter, right, from 3 hours to 2 hours, but still provide enough feedback and information about what that student really knows and doesn't know?
Right. So there's really kind of a third group here that's affected by this change, and that is the makers of the test. So one of the interesting details to the shift is that this is going to take on a dynamic format, meaning that it's no longer a static test that obviously paper and pencil mandates. With technology, they can essentially create a more adaptive test that gets smarter about the test taker. So it understands earlier on in the test how that student is performing, and can be more efficient with the questions it presents to those students. So the goal of creating any good test is to make it as short as you possibly can while still measuring the thing that you're trying to measure. So technology and adaptability really allows test makers to get more targeted with the questions being asked and effectively not waste questions that are just not useful in differentiation.
Got it. And that will be factored into the score eventually, right? Like how difficult the questions you're given and answered. We probably don't have time to get into that, but folks,
it's complicated, but yes.
Yeah, but people can read about it on your blog, which I'll direct them to later. But critics of the test say, these tests are unreliable and inequitable, kind of an inequitable judge of students' academic abilities, especially hurting underrepresented minorities and low-income students. Does the digital test make for a more equitable playing field, you think?
I think it's going to kind of shift that conversation to different definitions of equity. So I don't necessarily think this is going to solve some of those underlying concerns. I think it could provide increased access in some cases, but I think we're going to continue to be, contemplating some of these larger issues. And I don't look at today's announcement as being a magic wand to address that. As far as reliability, though, you mentioned reliability. I actually still think the standardized testing of the SAT and ACT have a fairly decent reliability measure. It's not something that can be taken entirely, but I think you'll see this improvement actually make this test even more reliable.
I was going to say, when you say reliable, do you mean what it tells the college about the student's ability to succeed at that college? And as I understand now, it is one piece of the puzzle, right? Like no school accepts or rejects a student solely on their SATs, right?
Fair point, yes. And I'm actually using the term reliable here in a fairly narrow testing context, meaning that a given score, let's say a 650, can be treated reliably to mean the same thing as another 650 from another student at another point in time. As far as how much that predicts into the future, there is some research that shows that the SAT, when taken with other factors such as transcript and rigor, it adds sort of a complementary effect to the reliability. But you're still in the business of forecasting unknowns when you're in college admissions, and all of these items taken in isolation don't necessarily say all that much.
Is improving availability a factor here? You talked about increasing access. I've heard from Bay Area kids who have been going to crazy lengths to be able to even sit for a test, like they can't get a slot without driving 6 hours or flying out of state. Is that true?
That's been a pain point for sure over the last couple of years. I would say it was worse 2 years ago, got a little better last year, and we're seeing signs of improvement as we look into the spring. But that's taken a very broad view. I think for any individual student, it doesn't necessarily feel that way. The College Board might feel like they're generally meeting demand, but we hear plenty of stories like you cited of individual students still struggling to find a place to sit. As you said, this change is not going into effect for a couple of years, so it's not going to address any of those near-term issues. But I think it signals that the College Board is sort of hearing some of these concerns and trying to address them eventually.
All right. What about the security of the test? I know you mentioned that students will still have to go to school or a test site and that it'll still be proctored, right? So, but in terms of like cheating or things like that, with Varsity Blues, that was certainly an issue. Do you think it's actually safer or more secure, I should say, digitally?
Yeah, I think actually test makers would tell you that the use of digital, but really the use of dynamic format makes the test even more secure because it kind of introduces additional security structures. You can effectively, test makers have more variables in play with a digital test, so they can effectively create a unique test for each student. Now, that's never going to eradicate all bad actors, and hopefully a combination of technological improvements, oversight, and just the consequences that students face. You cite the Varsity Blues scandal, but that was a scandal, and it was a major illegal scheme. So, these high stakes tests have never been easy for cheaters. And I think technology in some ways would give College Board even more assurance that these tests are going to be hard to crack. I'm
sure they'll figure out a way so you can't have multiple browsers open or have another device, right?
That's actually exactly right. Students are going to have to download a lockdown app that essentially introduces them to the exam, but cuts them off from anything else on their device.
Look, I wonder if it's all too little too late, because many schools are now test optional, right? And then you have some like the UC system that are just test blind, won't even consider them. Will this convince colleges to come back or at least keep using their products?
That's always the ultimate question. Anytime there's a change or discussion around college admission testing, you have to ask that question early: is how will the marketplace respond? Will colleges give the support to this change? Early signs. Now, we're very early into this announcement, but today there were generally positive reviews from college admission representatives that were cited in other media outlets saying that they kind of embrace this. So I'd also say that, we tend to talk about colleges in this monolithic way as though they all act in one sort of single way, when in reality, these policies are so nuanced and so circumstantial. So I try to encourage families to, not look at just kind of the generalizations across the country, but to focus on how testing can either serve their needs in their specific testing college goals, or decide that testing just is not part of the equation for them. Optionality just gives more of that choice, but it also introduces some of that, paranoia and uncertainty about what's the right thing to do.
Yeah. All right. By the way, I should mention the digital concept is not totally new. They've been working on it for a while. The ACT is going that way as well. Of course, the GRE for graduate school students, they've gone digital. So a lot more conversations to come as we learn more about the process. But Bruce Reed, thank you so much for sharing your expertise. And for folks who want to learn more details, you can go to the Compass Education Group's blog, and we do have a link on our website. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Have a good night.
You too. Is a former political leader in San Francisco cashing in on a stalled development project? What a new report says when we come back.
In commercial break.
All right, everybody, thanks for joining us today. I haven't even logged in yet to see who's with us today. I'm sure my regulars are here, but we have the San Francisco Standard coming up. If you haven't checked it out, they have a great website, hyperlocal San Francisco stories, and today's is fascinating. All right, taking a short break. Be right back. All right, everybody, let's do this.
We are back in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5 seconds, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Part of building a better Bay Area is highlighting anyone that's working toward the same mission that we have here at ABC7. The brand new San Francisco Standard has recruited a team of journalists with a goal to serve everyone with a stake in the future of San Francisco. Joining us today is reporter Matt Smith to talk about a new story highlighting former Mayor Willie Brown's role in the development of Hunters Point. This has been ongoing. So, Matt, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you.
What does your report contend about the former mayor of San Francisco and his firm, Shipyard Advisors?
Well, we found some information about a very large payment that was made to a firm that consisted of him and two other people. And the payment, as you say, related to Hunters Point, the big plot of land to the southeast of the city. And our story was about how this company that he's part of received more than $1 million, seemingly for purposes of helping put a conclusion to a radioactive waste cleanup that's been going on for quite a long time, with the idea that eventually they'll be able to build thousands of houses there.
Right. So you know, a lot of political leaders in retirement become lobbyists, and as such, they receive money for making connections to expedite projects, for example. Where in all this is there something apparently improper?
Well, we weren't able to find any lobbying registration by him, his two associates, nor the company. So there's the issue of what seems to be lobbying, because the company paid for facilitating communications with government agencies. And an expert told us that that is lobbying. That's definitional. So there's that. And then there's the simple fact that the Willie Brown Hunters Point case is a little bit special because he was central to the putting together of a deal with the Navy, which owns the land because it used to be a shipyard, and San Francisco. Fast forward, and he's involved in the financing of that project that he helped get off the ground, and now he's apparently involved for lobbying would be a very large amount of money in trying to help get a conclusion to this radioactive waste cleanup.
So what did the records show in terms of how much money we're talking about?
During 2020, $1.3 million paid to this firm whose name you just said, our Shipyard Advisors, which consisted of Willie Brown, his attorney and business partner, and then also a former executive of the company that's been doing the development there. And so it was $1.3 million in 2020, and payments continued, according to these records, in the amount of $100,000 a month to just Willie Brown and another partner after 2020. So we don't know exactly how much, but certainly quite a bit more than $1 million.
Got it. So you're saying what it looks like is lobbying, but there's not the paperwork required when you are engaged in lobbying. So have you reached out to him to get a response to that?
Oh, certainly. And Stephen Kay, who is Willie Brown's attorney and is one of the partners on this, said in a note that didn't really respond to our questions, but said something along the lines of people and associated with the Hunters Point project obey all laws. We didn't get answers to the questions we had about this particular company.
Okay. Also, if you could talk about brokering investment visas from foreign nationals. That was another component that you say former Mayor Brown engaged in. And talk about what that is and what the law permits.
Sure. So I didn't find any violation of laws with respect to what you just described. And what that is the United States for a while has had what people call an investment visa program. Invest $500,000 in an approved project, and you're in a process to get a certain type of visa. Willie Brown, a number of years ago, and still to this day, became a principal of firms that were set up to broker these investments, and the investments were used to help pay for this housing project at Hunters Point. The issue there has been that when they've put roadshows on in China to sell these investments, Willie Brown has been described as the chairman of this company. It's been sort of characterized as a Willie Brown project, which again, our story's theme was he was key to getting this up and running, and now has been key to making money off of it.
All right. Matt, thank you so very much for sharing your story with us. I should mention that we, too, also reached out to former Mayor Brown for a comment on this SF Standard story. We haven't heard back yet either. If and when we do, we will certainly let you know his response. ABC7 is excited to continue our partnership with the brand new San Francisco Standard. The Standard's deep and insightful reporting on our city does just that, and we have links to the San Francisco Standard's other original reporting on our website, abc7news.com. To watch more of their videos, check out our ABC7 Bay Area streaming TV app. All right, we just learned that former Giants great Barry Bonds did not get elected into the Baseball Hall of Fame in his final attempt. Sports director Larry Beil will be joining us to break it all down. We'll be right back.
In commercial break.
Share with me what you think. Barry Bonds, shutout, did not make it. Let me see if I can find out what the vote was. Like, you need 75%. Does our producer know what the vote was? Latest. What was the vote? Do we know the vote? Barry Bonds got 66%. He needed 75, yeah. He's been in that same area in the 60s for the past few years. What do you think? Fair, not fair? Fair or not fair? Do you think Barry Bonds should have been voted in or not? Of course, he always has the, steroid use cloud hanging over him. I think people disagree, though, over whether that should disqualify him or not. Reading some comments on Twitter, people are certainly not happy with it.
1 minute.
What do you think? Any comments? Larry Beil will be joining us in just a moment. We'll be right back.
Yeah, I am.
Oh, Larry's running in here now.
7, 6, 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Barry Bonds has been shut out of the Hall of Fame. The results of this year's vote by the writers was revealed just a short time ago, and the former Giants slugger did not get the support he needed. He got 66%. This was the last time Bonds' name appeared on the ballot. Joining us now to talk about this is ABC7 sports director Larry Beil. Larry, surprised or not surprised?
No, I'm not surprised at all. I mean, I thought it was going to be really close. I actually thought it was going to be a little bit closer than the final numbers revealed. You need 75% to get into the Baseball Hall of Fame. And as it turns out this year, only one player did, and that is David Ortiz, who got just over 77% of the vote. Bonds at 66%. He'd been trending upward in recent years, but the Baseball Writers Association of America a few years ago changed the window. It used to be you had 15 years from retirement to get voted into the Hall of Fame. They shrunk that down to 10, and they did it deliberately to try to shrink the window down in which guys like Bonds and Clemens and Schilling and others would have the opportunity to get in. They didn't want the window open another 5 years because you could see the trend line. Eventually, Bonds would have gotten in, as well as probably some of the others, and a lot of the writers just are adamantly against that. In addition to a lot of old-time players who also feel that the game was tainted by those who used steroids.
Right, so let's talk about that, because in the responses I see, there seems to be this struggle between morality and history, and those who argue on the history side say when you look at his achievements, no question he should be in, and that the performance-enhancing drugs was more indicative of the era as opposed to him. What do you think about that?
Well, baseball is unique among many sports in that it looks at its records, its numbers. They're cherished in a way that you just don't see in, let's say, the NFL or the NBA. And when it comes to the Baseball Hall of Fame, it's looked at not as a museum, which is what it is, but many consider it to be almost this cathedral, paying homage to baseball and the history. But if you look at the numbers, first of all, there's a lot of guys in the Baseball Hall of Fame that you wouldn't necessarily want as your next door neighbor. Not all of them are great humanitarians and great guys, going back to Ty Cobb and many others. But if you just look at a numbers-based analysis, Bonds, 72 homers, 73 in one season, 762 lifetime, 7 MVP awards, 14 All-Star appearances, 12 Silver Slugger awards, the most feared batter in his era. To me, when you look at these numbers, and everybody has their own criteria for what the entries to the Baseball Hall of Fame should be. To me, the question is, can you tell the story of Major League Baseball and the era in which he played without the name Barry Bonds? And the answer to that is no.
Right.
And you could make the same case for others like Roger Clemens. Can you tell the story of baseball, let's say when Bonds played, 1986 to 2007, can you tell the story of the game without his name? There's no question. Now, in the case of Roger Clemens, we have the famous, oh, I must have misremembered testimony when they went before Congress, and Rafael Palmeiro and I did not use steroids and all of that. You had all these guys, Mark McGuire, I'd rather not talk about the past. Let's look to the future. Everybody has kind of a quote or a moment symbolic of their involvement in this mess and then their consequential testimony. In Bond's case, the line was, I never knowingly used performance-enhancing drugs. Nobody believed that. In addition to this, you have to look at the human side. I think last year there were 400 members of the Baseball Writers Association of America that voted. Bonds was not Mr. Congeniality. I mean, we all dealt with him. He was a huge pain in the butt most of the time. So there is a human element to this where people say, look, this guy treated me like a jerk for the better part of 20 years. I'm not going to vote for him no matter what the numbers are. And the steroid hook gives you an easy out.
I see. Well, is there something else the Hall of Fame could do to acknowledge him and Clemens?
Well, I would say this. To me, I would say put all these guys in and just put the asterisk there, and on their plaque in Cooperstown say, all right, here are the numbers, you give the whole story, but he was involved in the steroid era and indicated that he did use, but not knowingly. That's his testimony. Just put it all out there and let the people that come through the Hall of Fame decide. But also, there is one other avenue. There's something called the Game Era Ballot. It's a 16-person committee that will consider players from 1988 forward. They will meet every couple of years or so. That could be the backdoor entry for guys who have been linked to steroids like Bonds and Clemens and others, but it remains to be seen how those 16 people will look at his candidacy. I mean, he should be in based on baseball merits. Even if you just take the steroid numbers out, he'd still be a Hall of Famer, but here we are.
We have about 15 seconds, but Larry, do you think Barry Bonds cares anymore?
I think he cares, but it's not life and death. He's got a pretty good life based on what we've seen.
All right, we'll take a short break on the air, but we'll continue to chat on Facebook Live.
In commercial break.
All right, so Larry, explain to me then, why did David Ortiz make it? Do you think it's just that he had people liked him better? Basically.
I mean, when you have the nickname Big Papi, who doesn't love Big Papi?
Right.
And the other thing with David Ortiz, if you want to question why he's there, I mean, he was a designated hitter for most of his career. He didn't even play a position. That used to almost automatically disqualify you from Hall of Fame consideration. But when I look at baseball right now, and Ortiz has good numbers, 541 career homers, 17th in history. But he almost got in as a 10-time All-Star, got 77, let's call it 78% of the vote. He was only 3 percentage points above the threshold. So clearly, his situation stemmed from a 2003 PED test that was supposedly anonymous. So he didn't have the direct linkage. Even though his name is in the Mitchell report, there isn't as much evidence, if you want to say, when you compare him with Bonds. So there's the likability factor. You don't have the direct correlation that he really used. You didn't have a huge trial involving Balco or any of the media attention. In fact, you have the other side with Ortiz, a member of a popular Red Sox team that ended the curse of the Bambino, and he's just a guy that people love, and Bonds is the antithesis of that for so many others. I gotcha. Hey, we have a viewer comment here from Timothy who says if Bonds got in, so should Rose. I guess he means Pete Rose. Yeah, well, Pete Rose is a whole separate category because of the gambling accusations. That's, even more of a problem for the purists than the steroids, at least for many of them. So I don't think Pete's ever going to get in. And Pete also, he damaged his own case so many times by just lying and lying and lying and getting caught. Right. All right. Well, Larry, I'm sure at 4 o'clock coming up, we'll continue to talk about Barry Bonds not being elected to the Hall of Fame, which remains at this point still more of a church than a museum. Yes. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thanks, Larry. All right. See you in a few minutes at 4. Okay.
Thank you so much for joining us today on this interactive show, Getting Answers. Today, we talked about the new digital SATs coming your way. We'll be here every weekday at 3 o'clock on air and on live stream answering your questions. World News Tonight is coming up next, and Larry and I will see you back here at 4 o'clock.